Crushing the cultural Marxists. Breaking the grip of corrupt oligarchs. And taking back our country through America first. Here's your host of liberty and reality, John Henson.
Welcome back to the Liberty and Reality Podcast. Before we begin today, let's establish a baseline because this episode is going to be controversial. We are going to get into the topics of race and culture, and some people are going to get angry. This episode is not meant to offend anyone. It's not meant to hurt feelings. It's just meant to talk about the problems of cultural Marxism and how they relate to race. Let me say this right from the start. Nothing in this podcast is here to claim that racism does not exist. It 100% exists. It has been demonstrated many times in history to horrid ends. It has been demonstrated across societies, across time periods. It's real. So let's understand my thesis right away. I'm saying that once again, yes, racism exists, and it is an absolutely worthy cause to stamp it out. I have 4 biracial children and a foreign-born spouse. Yes, I have skin in the game. What I am saying here is the woke cultural Marxism class struggle that we have seen over the last few years is not designed to combat racism. The means of division in the service of oligarchs pulling the political strings. Both political parties have used it when it serves their ends. Now, class struggle attacks culture. For America First, it attacks and demeans the American culture that has pulled millions of people out of poverty globally. And yes, it is the ideals of liberty that pushed Western society to end slavery, create universal suffrage, and give equal rights to millions across the board. It obviously has not been a fast process, but consider this. The human condition, according to Thomas Hobbes, was historically nasty, short, and brutish. Our enlightenment has been slow, but when you compare the liberty of Western civilization, particularly the United States, any other civilization in history, none have been more free. So let's understand that woke cultural Marxism isn't about making things better for minority groups. It's about separating us from the American founding principles of individual freedom and liberty in the service of their own Marxist needs. Their own elitist needs. Divided we fall, and the oligarchs know it. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on the psychological engine driving the entire subversion that Yuri Bezmenov warned us about. The weaponization of the Marxist concept of class struggle through modern identity politics. Make no mistake, this is not an organic social movement or an innocent quest for civil rights. This is a deliberate, calculated strategy to dismantle the foundation of Western civilization. Now, in pure Marxist theory, you cannot have revolution without conflict. To create conflict, you must divide society into rigid competing groups. You must define an absolute enemy. Founders of Black Lives Matter openly boasted on camera that they were trained Marxists and avowed communists. They knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't looking to heal racial wounds. They were utilizing the classical communist playbook of class warfare to gain political leverage and financial control. These trained communists were well funded by the oligarch class. Following the 2020 protests, major corporate oligarchs, elite Silicon Valley donors, flooded the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation with a massive wave of capital, contributing a total of over $90 million to the organization. Now, tax records later revealed that millions of this institutional funding were directly spent by the core leadership on a $6 million luxury California estate. They were also spent on lucrative multi-million dollar contracts awarded to family members and board affiliates. I guess that's equity. In Marxist class struggle, there always has to be an oppressor and an oppressed. For modern woke Marxists, the designated enemy is white males, an Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Protestant culture that served as the bedrock of America since its founding. They target this specific culture because it is the native architecture of liberty, individual rights, private property, and our constitutional republic. It is our founding ideology. To destroy the republic, they must vilify its foundation. They labeled its foundation culture as inherently racist, homophobic, patriarchal, and anti-feminist, along with a whole host of other things. They invent an endless conveyor belt of victim groups, from the hyper-specific sexual identities to weaponized concepts of indigenous struggle. Anything to fracture our population into hostile classes. If you can keep the population permanently warring against itself, you ensure complete top-down control. That's the goal. Everywhere class struggle is introduced, it is sold as a movement for liberation, equality, or equity, but it never ends in freedom. It always ends in absolute tyranny. Look at the historical pattern of betrayal. Now, the earliest large scale Marxist revolution happened in Russia. It was the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. And this Marxist class struggle was waged against the royalty, the Tsar. The leaders promised the working class that they would inherit the earth. They used desperate, well meaning people as cannon fodder to tear down the old dictatorship, only to immediately replace it with an even more ruthless, blood soaked communist dictatorship. The history of the gulags and Soviet atrocities is available for anyone to read. Now, in the mid 20th century, Chairman Mao, remember, it was the Chinese following the Russian example. Chairman Mao turned the class struggle against the bourgeoisie. That is, the rich, the academics, the doctors, the professionals, and the bureaucrats. He unleashed the fanatical youth of his Red Guard to destroy anyone deemed an oppressor. And that list changed regularly based on Mao's wishes. Millions of innocent people were humiliated, they were tortured and slaughtered. The result? China became a brutal, soul crushing dictatorship that morphs its control apparatus daily today by using hundreds of millions of facial recognition AI cameras to track and censor its citizens in real time. The regime strategically embraced a corrupt version of capitalism for the elites while maintaining a ruthless dictatorship, allowing a wealthy class of billionaires to emerge, but only if they pledged absolute loyalty to the state. This is what happens in the normalization phase, when society can no longer fight back. This total digital surveillance state has now become the blueprint for the globalist oligarchs who want to bypass messy democratic choices and control the working class. This exact model is being rapidly exported to the West, including the United States. Now, the goal is the creation of a central bank digital currency. We haven't gotten there yet. America First has fought back vociferously against this. That's the goal. The central bank digital currency is designed to monitor your private money, the way you spend. Furthermore, the implementation of corporate ESG metrics function exactly like China's social credit system. It allows the elite to track behavior, starve unapproved businesses of capital, and silence working class dissent. In other words, anybody who makes the oligarchs mad doesn't get to do business. And those central bank digital currencies will work the same for the individuals. You won't be able to spend your money. You won't be able to move your money. You'll be cast out of their polite society if you get out of line. That's the goal. It's all about control. And you can see it. There's a lot of places out there right now. If you go and you try to use cash, they won't accept it. This is them trying to normalize digital currency. Now, this identical pattern has played out with absolute precision across the globe. We saw it in the killing fields of Cambodia, where a third of the population was wiped out in the name of class struggle. We see the results today in the starving prison state of North Korea. Now, these are not places that our society should want to go. We've already gotten the warning. We know what happens with Marxist class struggle. Excuse me. Now, the ultimate lesson of history is clear. Wherever class struggle goes, individual liberty and freedom fall. It never ends in the utopia promised by the overlords pushing the narrative. Now, the elites who stoke the fires of grievance always become the new dictators ruling over the ashes. What Marx and Lenin laid out was a clear blueprint for this destruction. Now, Marx argued that all human history is driven by class struggle, but it was a struggle between those who own the means of production and those who sell their labor. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels famously declared that the history of all hitherto existing society is a history of class struggles. Marx asserted that capitalism inherently exploits the working class, inevitably generating a conflict that can only be resolved through a violent proletarian revolution to overthrow the ruling class. Other goals were to abolish private property and establish a stateless, classless communist society. Now, here's the problem. When you are trying to overthrow the ruling class in a constitutional republic, the people are supposed to be the ruling class. We, the people. So, what this is designed to do is exactly what it says: overthrow the ruling class, overthrow us, not them. It's not the old class struggle of Marx, it's something new. It's designed to overthrow our culture for their means, for their ends. Now, Lenin expanded on Marxist theories by focusing on the practical execution of the revolution, stating that class struggle must be driven by a highly disciplined, centralized vanguard party of professional revolutionaries. That's important as we go along here. Lenin emphasized that the state is merely a weapon used by one class to suppress another. He argued that the working class could not achieve victory through peaceful or democratic means alone, asserting that the proletariat must violently shatter the existing capitalist state apparatus and replace it with a dictatorship of the proletariat. This is an authoritarian transition period used to completely crush any remaining existence from the old ruling class. The evolution of Marxist class warfare in America shifted dramatically during the mid 20th century, moving away from traditional economic categories to focus entirely on race and culture. And remember, the goal was to have professional revolutionaries. Karl Marx envisioned a revolution led by the industrial working class. But by the 1950s, the Cold War, after World War II, it became glaringly obvious that the American worker had no interest in overthrowing capitalism. The American working class was patriotic, religious, and achieving upward mobility through the free market. Ironically, this is a time when civil rights were being achieved, equality was being achieved, slowly at first. Things like integrating the military had taken place, integrating the schools. Those things were happening. They were happening through the existing system, the existing Western civilization. Now, seeing this failure, European intellectuals like Herbert Marcuse, who had come over prior to World War II, fleeing the Nazis, he was a prominent theorist of the Frankfurt School who immigrated to the United States. He realized that to subvert America, the Marxist playbook had to be completely rewritten. The Frankfurt School was an institute of German neo Marxist academics who realized that Western capitalism could not be overthrown through an economic workers' revolt. People were too happy for that. Instead, they designed a strategy called critical theory. It was designed to dismantle Western civilization from within by relentlessly attacking its cultural pillars, families, and religious traditions. As an immigrant fleeing Europe and fleeing European totalitarianism by the Nazis, Marcuse possessed an outsider's academic view of American culture. This allowed him to systematically dissect its vulnerabilities and identify new social fractures. His transplantation to American academia as one of those professional revolutionaries gave him the perfect institutional platform to inject these foreign subversive theories directly into the minds of the nation's youth. Marcuse argued that the new revolutionary agents would not be factory workers, but rather a coalition of marginalized outsiders, racial minorities, radical students, and alienated intellectuals. And that list has only increased to where we are now. Now, this domestic cultural vulnerability was quickly weaponized by America's geopolitical adversaries, as the Kremlin and the KGB actively stepped in to fund, inspire, and direct these rising movements. This is where Yuri Bezmenov was active. This is what he fled from. Under the Soviet strategy of active measures, the KGB's primary objective of the United States was not traditional military espionage. It was psychological warfare aimed at fracturing the target, us, the United States, from within. The Kremlin understood that race and anti war sentiment during the Vietnam War were America's primary pressure points. And they poured millions of dollars through front organizations like the Communist Party USA to fan flames of domestic unrest. Declassified historical records and Soviet archives later confirmed that the KGB directly financed and provided propaganda support to radical militant factions within the civil rights and anti war movements. Now, by amplifying the most aggressive elements of organizations like the Black Panthers and supplying ideological materials to student groups, the Soviet apparatus turned legitimate domestic debate into hostile, irreconcilable conflicts. The Kremlin's goal was purely strategic: paralyze the United States domestically so it could not project power or resist communist expansion globally. Now, Marcuse's pivotal contribution to the evolution was his theory of repressive tolerance. He argued that traditional Western tolerance was actually a hidden form of oppression because it allowed capitalist systems to maintain stability. To counter this, Marcuse advocated for a double standard: absolute tolerance for radical left wing movements and absolute intolerance and suppression for right wing and traditional viewpoints. Now let's take this apart a little bit. He was against the capitalist systems that maintain stability. He wanted to tear those down. So if you think about where these poor minority groups are that he attacked, where are they at today? And most of them are poor and have a difficulty within American society to advance themselves because of this philosophy. That's who he targeted. That's what he wanted. That was the goal. So this intellectual framework directly weaponized the cultural upheavals of the 1960s and indirectly the cultural upheavals of the 2000s. It shifted the target of class struggle from the bourgeoisie to the American culture itself. Marcuse's ideas became the foundational text for a new wave of radical student activists who viewed the entire American system as inherently corrupt and needing total destruction. He was creating professional revolutionaries as Lenin had intended. This academic theory quickly found its teeth on the streets through militant organizations like the Black Panther Party and the Weather Underground. The Black Panthers took classical Leninist Marxist concepts and applied it directly to race, defining black Americans as an occupied internal colony and white Americans as the capitalist oppressor class. At the same time, the Weather Underground, a radical faction of the Students for a Democratic Society, took Marcuse's theories to their violent logical extremes. And understand, when they talk about democratic society, they're talking about a Marxist society, a socialist society. They launched a domestic bombing campaign targeting government buildings, banks, the police stations, and openly stated that their goal was to violently overthrow U.S. imperialism from within to support global communist revolutions. However, by the mid 70s, the anti war movement died. They got out of Vietnam, the militancy faded, and the strategy evolved yet again. Now, as the author and researcher Chris Rufo has thoroughly documented, the radicals realized that an open, violent assault on the United States military and police was a tactical failure. Instead of abandoning revolution, they executed what German Marxist Rudi Dutschke termed the long march through the institutions. The street rattles of the 1960s traded their leather jackets and dynamites for business suits and academic tenure. Now remember, these were the students during the 60s. These were the people being taught by Marcuse and Marcuse's adherents. When they left the colleges, they went into business, they went into academia, they spread out to the leadership of American society. So you get figures like Weather Underground co founder Bill Ayers, who you probably heard linked to Obama, who entered elite universities where they began reshaping the American educational system from the top down. Now, remember, every military leader, every business leader, every leader in society has to go through the colleges. They have to get their degrees, get advanced degrees. So, using the university systems, using academia, was a great funnel to spread these ideas. Now, Chris Rufo's core argument highlights that this institutional migration allowed 1960s radicalism to evolve directly into the modern critical race theory and the diversity bureaucracy. In the universities, these former radicals and their disciples realized while you could not legally execute a violent communist revolution in America, you could institutionalize it by capturing administrative state power. They took the old Black Panther and Weatherground frameworks of racial grievance, synthesized them with Marcuse's repressive tolerance, and embedded them into the bureaucratic framework of American life, transforming K through 12 classrooms, university hiring committees, and corporate HR departments into ideological enforcement zones. So that means they're getting them young and training them. Anybody who's in those public school systems. The line from the 1960s street warfare to modern identity politics is entirely unbroken. What began as Herbert Marcuse's academic subversion evolved into militant class warfare of the Black Panthers, which was then laundered through the university system for over 40 years to emerge as the multi billion-dollar diversity, equity, and inclusion complex we see today. The goal remains exactly what Marx intended: the division of society into warring factions of oppressors and oppressed, to paralyze a nation, and to justify the implementation of a totalitarian centralized state. And that totalitarian centralized state is going to be used in the service of the oligarch class. It is not for us. It is not for the supposedly oppressed. And when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed, the free world celebrated what looked like a total defeat of communism. But international Marxism didn't die. It simply mutated and went underground, hiding inside Western academia. Throughout the 1990s, while America was distracted by economic prosperity, these institutional radicals refined their theories. This is during the end of history period that Francis Fukuyama talked about. By the early 2000s, this quiet subversion resurfaced as a fully weaponized academic doctrine, critical race theory. The resurgence laid the groundwork for the mid 2010s explosion of woke ideology and the rise of organizations like Black Lives Matter. This evolution directly mirrors Samuel Huntington's prophetic ideas outlined in the Class of Civilizations. Huntington argued that in the post-Cold War world, the primary source of conflict would no longer be economic or purely ideological, but deeply cultural. So the modern class warfare pushers understood this completely. They took Huntington's premise, the clash of civilizations, and intentionally manufactured one inside our own borders. Their goal is to destroy the Western civilization that Huntington talked about. So let's address the hard truth of the human condition. As I said before, racism exists. That is 100% true and has always been a part of human history. However, True racial prejudice is fundamentally a defensive tribal response. Race, sexuality, whatever immutable characteristics the Marxists use to define us, acts as shorthand signals. People use these signals to guess how someone else will treat them, based entirely on the previous experience that have been taught. You might call this stereotypes. But that individual psychological defense mechanism is not the real root of our modern crisis. Modern class warfare pushers are not trying to cure racism. They are actively dividing us culturally. They are separating everyone into rigid, walled off cultural silos. They train people so that when they see someone with different immutable characteristics, they automatically react to the different culture they expect to experience from them. We see how absurd this tracking is when reality breaks their narrative. For example, people are often completely taken aback when a Chinese person who speaks with a thick southern drawl because they grew up in the American South speaks to them. The system assumes your skin color dictates your cultural identity, erasing individual merit entirely. In other words, what they are saying is that our skin color is supposed to dictate our culture. We are not individuals in their eyes. Cultural Marxists are dividing us into these groups and making sure we stay there. Now, the most evil and nefarious way the strategy is deployed by cultural Marxists is how they treat Black Americans who attempt to break away from the destructive, self sabotaging, false culture that economist Thomas Sowell identified as cracker culture. Sowell documented that the counterproductive social habits often associated with modern inner cities, such as aversion to hard work, a disdain for academic excellence, high rates of fatherlessness, and violent defense of honor, did not originate in Africa. They were actually absorbed from the lawless, illiterate culture of the Ulster Scots and English borderers who settled in the American South. So, what happens today to Black Americans under the woke regime is devastating. When a Black individual seeks a better education, strives to build a stable nuclear family, speaks standard English, or builds a successful business, they are often viciously attacked by their own captured communities. That is, they are attacked by the Marxist trained elements within their communities. This is a calculated trap designed to enforce conformity and hold Black people in poverty. That is the entire game. Attack the dominant American culture of liberty and success, trap minority populations in less successful dependent subcultures, and keep them relying entirely on the state. The woke game is never about making people's lives better or overcoming historical struggles. It is about aggravating and prolonging the problem to justify the existence of the diversity bureaucracy. They will go so far as to create racism where it doesn't even exist, just to keep the narrative alive. We saw this perfectly with the Jussie Smollett attack, where, where a Hollywood actor staged a completely fabricated hate crime to stoke national racial fury. And the media went right along with it. Even to this day, many of them do that. Even after it was proven to be a lie. Even after Smollett was convicted. So we also see it with wealthy institutional giants like the Southern Poverty Law Center, where they were recently exposed in funding scandals, funding actual white supremacists to create racist incidents. They were manufacturing racism to keep themselves alive, to keep the narrative alive. So, this is a permanent loop of manufactured grievances designed to destroy our shared American identity. Cultural Marxists prolong the sickness because they profit from the cure. We need to stand our ground and attack these cultural Marxists. Make people see the lie. Defend American culture. Defend Western civilization. We'll see you next time on Liberty Reality. Thank you for watching.